You know, dinosaurs are used more than just about any other topic to really inundate people with evolutionary thinking.
You would assume that canyon required many years to form, but instead it was formed in a single day.
Whoa, what have we got here? It seems to describe what the Bible is talking about when it talks about a global deluge.
Part of this evolutionary story asserts that dinosaurs evolved into birds.
We are not the product of evolution, and we have not been here for millions of years.
The discovery of soft tissues in dinosaur fossils sparked a revolution in paleontology.
But there are indications in the fossils that this story doesn't add up.
This is a great bit of evidence that points towards a young Earth, that these fossils are not millions of years old, but were buried only a few thousands of years ago.
We see flood sediments pushed way up into these mountains. Tremendous upheaval was going on in the Earth.
This is bigger than an asteroid. There's a consistent pattern of the water moving across continents 1,000 feet or more above present sea level.
We can use the truth about dinosaurs to show people that the Bible really is true from the very beginning.
What happened to them? Did they slowly go extinct? Or was it something sudden, something global, cataclysmic? Can science answer these questions? Can the Bible unravel this mystery? Uncovering the truth about dinosaurs.
Well, welcome back to the afternoon sessions. We have really some cool subjects that we're going to be talking about in these sessions. Before we do that, I did want to mention about the youth conference again. I'll probably mention it once more. It's upcoming in 2 weeks. There's information in the parish hall there where the resources are. You can get more information about it. If you're familiar with Carl Kirby, he's the speaker. He's highly enthusiastic, I guess is the way I would phrase it. Okay. We do have more cards over here if you have questions you want to write to have answered in our final session after the second presentation this afternoon. We kind of ran out, but we have a few more, so if there's something that comes to mind during either one of these presentations, please write the question out. We're getting a lot, so it may not be read, but maybe they'll take it back and maybe they'll answer some other way to us. Okay, I just wanted to mention also another one of my favorite books, which is kind of what the subject is for this presentation. There's about 20 of them over there, I think. But this is the most complete dinosaur book that I've come across from a biblical creation perspective. I own more than I'd like to admit. But anyways, I would suggest that if you're looking for a dinosaur book, this is the one. With that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the author of that book. It is, let me get my information here. Okay, so I'm not going to go back through all of the, actually I've got the wrong sheet. Anyways, Dr. Clarey, he's going to talk about dinosaurs.
All right, that'll work.
My sheet with me.
That'll work.
Yay.
Okay. That worked just fine, thank you. I even wore my dinosaur socks. My wife buys me these things, so I have to wear them occasionally, or she gets after me. Why didn't you wear those? Anyway, but I wanted to answer a question some people asked. I didn't get to because I had to cut my talk off, my last talk. But why did the plates slow down to this much per year now? You know, why did they slow down? And the simple answer is they ran out of original cold, dense ocean crust. So once the original ocean crust of the Earth was destroyed and subducted away, all you had is hot crust. And it took a while for it to cool, but once you have that hot crust, it's like you stopped the gasoline. There's no more fuel to sink down in the earth, so everything just stopped. And so everything's still moving a little bit today because it's hard to stop big old trucks, and it's hard to stop plates that were moving real rapidly, but now they're kind of stopped because they're running on fumes. And there was just an article that came out. I'm going to write a news story for ICR's website explaining that secular or uniformitarian geologists are now noticing the plates are slowing down. I'm like, well, that's what we expect because they were stopping for the last 4,500 years, but they're still moving, still giving us earthquakes, still giving us volcanoes, but nothing like they were during the flood when they're moving, several meters or several yards per second. But the reason they've, the world is kind of stabilized is because that's used up all the original crust, which is the fuel. The density difference was the fuel. And so that's why. So if you were going to ask that question, and some of you did, I wanted to cut that one off and explain that one. I should have explained that in the flood talk. But anyway, back to dinosaurs, because dinosaurs are more fun, aren't they? More fun. We have more kids that are interested in dinosaurs. There's going to be a movie coming out this summer in June, Jurassic World. They're going to show feathered dinosaurs. And at ICR, we're not big fans of feathered dinosaurs. And there are some other creation ministries that say, oh, yeah, God could have made dinosaurs with feathers, but we still haven't seen the evidence. Show us the evidence. And so we think that birds had feathers, dinosaurs did not. And you'll see a little of that in this talk. But unfortunately, most of you going to see the movies are going to see Jurassic World, and you're going to see this feathered thing. And there's no evidence that that thing had feathers, especially that particular one, as we'll see. But anyway, we're moving right along. A lot of people also wonder, where do dinosaurs fit in the Bible? Aren't there dinosaurs millions of years old? Didn't they go extinct? Did they get on the ark? All these different things. Didn't dinosaurs live before humans? And in reality, the Flintstones are probably the most accurate show on TV. Dinosaurs and humans did live together, particularly after the flood. In the pre-flood world, I think they lived in separate areas, separate environments. And it was the mountains all came up late in the flood. So 80% of the world's mountains all formed as the flood waters were receding, and the earth was re-equilibrating. There's something called isostasy, and these mountains popped up. But the pre-flood world, they were probably separated by a few thousand feet of elevation. So you didn't have to flood Mount Everest. That's the point. That came up later as the flood waters were receding. And these Rockies here all popped up later. And in our field trips, we're going to see folded rocks. They're stand up straight, vertically, down at Garden of the Gods. And those were folded up, we believe, the best explanation is they were still not solid rock. They were just packed down sediments. And so you could fold rocks that are packed down. Try to fold real rocks, they crumble into a bazillion pieces. I think I read that somewhere in an engineering book, a bazillion pieces. Dr. G's not here to back up for the engineers, but I do math. I had a math minor. I can make up math like everybody. Anyway, this is not true, but the biggest question is this. This is my daughter and me on our way out west digging dinosaurs. Are these ever going to come back? Are we ever going to see these kinds of prices again? And we did temporarily under our last president, but this was back in the I think mid-90s or something. I was much younger back then. Anyway, what does the Bible say about dinosaurs? The Bible says this, and God made the beast of the earth according to its kind. Again, like Dr. G said, according to its kind. God says that over and over and over because we're slow listeners. God repeats like I repeat. My wife says, you already said that. I'm like, well, I taught college for 17 years full time. You have to repeat yourself. I got paid to talk. But you got to repeat yourself because at any given time, most of you aren't listening. So you got to hear it again and again and again. That maybe sinks in. But God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, not according to a bird. Each kind was separate. Also, to every beast of the earth, I've given every green herb for food. So this is out of the King James. God gave the dinosaurs plants to eat. Dinosaurs are part of the beast of the earth. The word dinosaur is not in the Bible, unless maybe in a few footnotes of certain study Bibles. Most of them don't even say that. And we'll see why here just in a minute. But dinosaurs were included in the beast of the earth. They were part of that creation on day 6 of the creation week. So later we see where God's talking about Behemoth to Job. He says, Behemoth, which I made along with you, which I think is referring back to I made on day 6, just like I made Adam and Eve on day 6. Dinosaurs were on the ark. I have so many students that I teach an occasional class for still, and so many people in churches that didn't realize dinosaurs were on the ark. And the reason we know that is God did not exclude anything. He brought every animal in pairs to the ark. And some of them were more than pairs. But God brought 2 pairs of everything, every kind. Not every maybe species, as humans define species, but every kind of animal. And so we'll see the kind is a little bit broader meaning, but not too broad. There are limits. But God says in Genesis 6:20, says, creatures that moved along the ground, 2 of every kind, and food, which would have been the plants. And Genesis 7, it talks about the flood. Everything on land perished, they had the breath of life. So if you weren't on the ark, if you weren't the chosen 2 dinosaurs for each kind, the chosen 2 cat kind, or whatever maybe there was a couple different cat kinds. If If you weren't part of that chosen two, you became a fossil in the flood, or you were destroyed in the flood completely, along with most of the humans. Noah's Ark is very, very, very big. The Bible gives us dimensions in cubits. This is the minimum size. It's been an 18-inch cubit, I believe, to get 450 feet long, which 450 feet is a football field and a half. That's pretty big. It's a long, long barge that they built, 75 feet high, or 75 feet wide, 45 feet high with 3 decks. So there are some specifics in the Bible God talks about, but again, the people that did the math, people before me that worked on studies, John Woodmarappy, who did a study for ICR years ago, showed that the ark might have only been 1/3 or about 2/3 or half full. There's plenty of room for more humans to get on the ark. And we did the math finally at ICR. Jeff Tompkins and I, Jeff Tompkins, our geneticist, we worked out some statistics, did the math, took a big database, 350 dinosaurs, looked at the leg bone circumference of the femur and the humerus, if you're a quadruped, and we determined the average adult size of a dinosaur is about the size of a Colorado buffalo. Did you guys have a Colorado buffalo? It's really a bison. We can call it a buffalo if you want. I don't know. It's a buffalo or a bison, but that's the average size or average mass of one. But in reality, on the ark, we believe God probably brought juveniles. He didn't bring a 131-foot-long Seismosaurus. Probably would have brought a juvenile of that kind on the ark. So he brought smaller dinosaurs than the adult size. So instead of big bison averages, we might have had maybe even sheep, like Dr. Henry Morris said. So many sheep could fit on the ark, and that might be the average size of the dinosaur on the ark was the size of a sheep. All right, there's only about 60 kinds, maybe 70 kinds of dinosaurs. There's over 1,000 species that have been named. Many of those species, you realize they name the same species more than once because they only find partial bones of most species, and so then they drop by the wayside. Over 50% of dinosaur species get washed away in the process. They lose those names. So Brontosaurus and Apatosaurus were the same thing, named here in Colorado, I believe, and in Wyoming, named twice. And they put a skull on from a couple miles away, couldn't find the skull. It was the wrong skull, but they named the same thing twice. So Apatosaurus is a Brontosaurus and vice versa. And it's just gotten so popular that you can use either name. But most times the first name is one that sticks around. The other second name gets dropped. But in that case, you can use them both. Just some trivia. So if you like Brontosaurus, you can still use it because it's gotten so popular. 2 Timothy 4:4 tells us this. Paul wrote to Timothy, they said, they shall turn away their ears from the truth and shall be turned unto fables. I'm going to have a little sip of water. The Greek word for fables, of course, comes our English word myth. So Paul's telling Timothy, at the end times, they'll turn their ears away from the truth and turn to fables. And the fables of dinosaur evolution and that dinosaurs evolved is one of those myths, as we'll see. The facts are found in the rocks. Here's where I took some students out to Thermopolis, Wyoming, digging. And you can actually dig up the dinosaur bones. You can see what's there. You can see the bone beds. The rocks don't lie. People do. So it's the people that make up the myths. But the bones are there. The bones are real. Sir Richard Owen defined dinosaurs as a group of reptiles that walk erect. They have holes in their hip sockets, so their legs come straight down like you and I walk. So they walk almost mammal-like, even though they're theoretically reptiles. And so here's a dinosaur, the way they would walk, two-legged dinosaur. Here's the way crocodiles, alligators, and turtles and everything today, they sprawl. Their legs come up to the side, then down, they drag their bellies. There's no belly dragging on dinosaurs. When you go up here to Dinosaur Ridge, we're going to see closely spaced footprints because the footprints verify that he was right back in 1841. And he just had a few fragmentary dinosaurs to work with. We didn't have all the cool dinosaurs they found in the American West at that point. And still, England's dinosaurs are still very fragmented compared to the more complete ones we find here in the U.S. So that's why the word is not in your Bible. The King James came out in 1611. This is over 200 years later. So you don't see dinosaur in the Bible. You see dragons. You see flying dragons even, which are probably the pterodactyls, but you don't see the word dinosaur. You see beasts of the earth. So they're collectively lumped in there. So let's look at a couple of myths of dinosaurs that you may hear. And this one is maybe not as, I guess, not as bad or not as universally held as it used to be, but it used to be that dinosaurs are buried slowly sometimes over the course of a year or two. There's all these articles out all the time, every day. We're bombarded with articles saying dinosaur, we found the ancestor of the T-Rex, we found the ancestor of this, we found the ancestor of that. That's part of that myth they're telling, but we'll look at that. Third, that dinosaurs evolved into birds. This is really big. They actually will stand up here. I've seen videos, heard talks, where the evolutionary paleontologists will say dinosaurs are birds. You're eating Thanksgiving dinner, you're eating a dinosaur. I'm not making this up. People ask me, they didn't really say that. I'm like, yes, they do. They believe dinosaurs are birds. They call them non-avian dinosaurs when they refer to them in their papers. It's very confusing. They're cross dinosaurs and birds. We'll look at that a little bit as we go along. And finally, dinosaurs are supposed to be, according to conventional geology, 66 million years old when they supposedly went extinct. It used to be 65. But what's a million years between friends? And then we're kind of keep pushing this number a little bit bigger. It's down to the Triassic. So we only find dinosaurs in Triassic level rocks, Jurassic level rocks, and Cretaceous level rocks. That's the dinosaur window. That's the Mesozoic, they call it, the middle of the fossil-rich layers. So we're really looking at sequences 4 and 5. When you're flooding the land, of course, that's when you find dinosaurs. They lived on land. But they're not really that old, as we'll see. And we talked about that earlier. So here's myth number 1. This is from Dr. Bob Bacher, who's a famous paleontologist. I think he worked at CU in Boulder for a while. So after 6 months or a year or two, the monsoon rains return, the level of the lake rises, spreading a soft blanket of limey mud over the sun-dried bodies. And so here he's talking about a dead body lays out there for a year or two. How often does that happen? If you kill something with your car, how long is that going to lay out there? A year or two? And this is a myth. And lakes don't bury things unless you have a reservoir and you move the dam up higher. Most lakes stay about the same level. They don't really change too much. This is a myth. What we find are bone beds, thousands and thousands and thousands of bones all collected like a log jam on top of each other, all tore apart. And the rock layers are usually about this thick, like in Thermopolis. And the rock unit we're digging on is about the size of this auditorium. And they found several thousand bones of all different species all mixed together. That's what you find. And there's often marine fossils mixed with them. We'll see more about that later. So here's some of those marine fossils over there. If you go to Dinosaur National Monument, you can see all these dinosaurs. There's also lots of clams. They just don't tell you that. When you look at the Hell Creek Formation, where you find all of our T-Rexes, or it's the Lance Formation in Wyoming, it's the same thing. We find now 6 species of sharks. They found one shark tooth right underneath where they took out Tyrannosaurus rex Sioux a couple of years ago. And they find bony fishes, some of which live in the ocean today, crocodiles, other dinosaurs, turtles, mammals, mostly swampy mammals like squirrels and beavers, things like that. No lions and tigers and bears, no horses. Those are found in rocks above the dinosaurs because I think they lived at higher elevation. They were buried on top. But we find all these weird mixing of land and marine. Every continent I look at, I go to India, there's mixing of land and marine with dinosaurs. I go to South America, you go to Europe. The European geologists have found that in their Cretaceous level rocks, the upper level dinosaur layers, part of the Zuni sequence, all the dinosaurs are found in marine rocks, almost exclusively in marine rocks like limestone. So they're like, how do all the dinosaurs wash out to sea? They're in chalk. How do you find dinosaurs in chalk? I read an article about a year ago on the first dinosaurs discovered in Ireland, where some of my ancestors come from. We didn't like the English, so we came over here. And we speak it, though. And they didn't believe it was a dinosaur for the longest time because it's found in limestone. There was a private collector who passed away, and finally the scientists looked at it and said, oh, he was right. These are dinosaur bones. First dinosaur bones discovered in Ireland just a couple years ago. He found them 20 years earlier, but nobody believed him because they're found in marine rocks. So not only marine fossils, but they're found in marine rocks. We actually drilled a well, well, we didn't, but oil companies did, in the North Sea, 75 miles off Norway, 1.5 miles down below the surface of the ocean. And they pulled up a core, and they found a dinosaur toe bone in it they could identify as a Ichthyosaurus. This big around of a core, out in the deep sea, 75 miles from Norway. How did that dinosaur get out there? Did it swim out? Did it die and float out there? How many animals die and float out to sea and don't get eaten? It was washed out just like the waves are coming in, the waves are washing back out. And so there's probably billions of fossils from the land all over the oceans. We just don't take enough cores. We drill wells, but we don't take cores. We log what's there, but we don't always take cores. Cores are only this big. And so lots and lots of strange things that you don't hear about in your textbooks. Spinosaurus and Coelacanth. About 7-8 years ago, the guy came, they discovered the biggest Spinosaurus, 50 foot long, bigger than a T-Rex, in Morocco. And it was in National Geographic, that's where this picture came from. He found car-sized coelacanth fish. Coelacanth is a living fossil. It was discovered in the 30s in the Indian Ocean, living 500 feet down. So it's a deep marine fish, but they find him with dinosaurs. So the speaker was presenting it in Dallas at SMU. He got done with his talk, and I asked him, I said, well, how do you get fish that live at 500 feet down the deep ocean today, living, found with Spinosaurus? And he said, oh, they must have been freshwater fish back then. But they look identical, the fossils, to what we see. Why would they suddenly become freshwater fish? How did they change to deep ocean fish? It's only because they want it to be that way. They don't want to admit that these are waves washed in, bringing in marine fossils all the way in from the deep ocean and burying them with dinosaurs. And that's what we see again and again and again, mixing of land and marine. We see those immediate death positions. We see the ichthyosaurs giving live birth. And there's even more of the babies inside here. There's the vertebrae from the other babies that weren't born, buried instantly. We see, my favorite is the fighting dinosaurs from Mongolia, found by a Polish expedition in the 70s. Here we have a velociraptor and a Protoceratops, a plant eater. This became a meat eater after the fall. And look at the arm is right inside the Protoceratops. It's about to bite down to protect himself like a trapped rat, and he's buried instantly. Frozen in that life assemblage, they call it, for thousands and thousands of years. Again, conventional geologists would say for 68 million years, but we believe about 4,500 years is all it was. But here they're about to bite down. It's like two WWE wrestlers in a hold, and they're buried instantly in the chokehold forever and ever and ever. Their bones are locked in that position. By the way, velociraptors are only about this tall. You over here don't see it. They're only about this tall. Their skulls are about this big. What you see in the movie is a Deinonychus, which is a different raptor. But Steven Spielberg liked the name Velociraptor better, so he's ruined a whole generation of people. And they also, I don't believe they steamed up windows either. That's another whole thing. I think they were cold-blooded. So a lot of what they put in those movies, and even the T-Rex was running too fast in the first movie, and they did correct that in the second one. Because a lot of that was what they believe. They're pushing their evolutionary theory upon you, even in the movies. And this current movie that's coming out is going to show feathered dinosaurs. But myth number one, the facts: dinosaurs result from catastrophic burial. All fossils form fast, and they have to be buried deep. I think it's one of the reasons why you don't have a lot of human fossils. They were buried last. They weren't buried deep enough. And they're spread all over as God wiped them off the highest hills at the last of the flood. They're the last things to be buried. And you're going to erode away the top layers. And you're also not going to bury them deep enough to become fossils. But that's, again, I don't know for certain. Fast and deep is the rule. Even Mary Schweitzer said this when she came to Dallas a few years ago and spoke. So a few of these paleontologists are getting it. Bob Bacher still doesn't, apparently, but some of these guys are. Let's move on to number two. Dinosaurs have many ancestors. And I cut one of these out to shorten the talk a bit. But let's just start with pictures of my daughter. We have kids for scale as geologists. You stick them next to the rocks and the dinosaurs. And that's why I had kids. So some of you understand that. So she's down in Colorado Springs. I'm going to go stay a few days with her when we get the conference over with. She's the one that nursed me back to health, literally, because she is a nurse. And but she wanted to help people, so that's what she wanted to do. But there's a Ceratopsian skull. Ceratopsian means hornhead. And this is Triceratops, one of the biggest skulls out there. Most of these actually have holes in their frills. So they weren't solid, except for Triceratops, which is odd. But we look at these things, we see lots of variety. All sorts of horn shapes, 2 horns, 3 horns, no horns. But all the body structure is the same. It's like looking around this room. We all have a little different shape to our skulls. We can tell each other apart. They had family units that apparently this family looked like this, and this family looked like this, and this family looked like this. When they're born, they all look the same. Is until they make sure that the horns grow funny, different shapes and different things. When you look at ancestors, where do they come from? Well, the Triceratops are all found up here in what's called Cretaceous rocks, the upper part of the Zuni, close to the high point of the flood. We don't find anything down here at all. We look down here, there's nothing that resembles a four-legged Ceratopsian. There's nothing. They just show up fully formed, boom, there they are in the Cretaceous. Upper dinosaur layers. They must have been living at the higher dinosaur level than all the other dinosaurs probably. Same thing about T-Rex. There's T-Rex Zoo in Chicago. Anybody seen that? Go to the Field Museum in Chicago. Pretty impressive. They moved it now, but it's still there. But they named it Sue because Sue Hendrickson found it. Stan was found by Stan Sakerson. Sue, I think, is a male. So Johnny Cash was right. Johnny Cash was right. Other people have said the big ones are females. So in the movies, you're going to see the biggest ones are females. But we don't really see that much in the reptilian world. The big crocodile bulls are the biggest ones. The biggest reptiles today in general are males. I don't know where they get this notion that the biggest ones are females. Yeah, most women don't want to be the biggest. A sexist would say, as Greg or Gutfeld would say. But anyway, I believe this is a male. And they try to work on some bones back here where they laid eggs in that area, and they found the bones there, so it shows this is probably a male after all, and so it's kind of confusing. But it's one of the biggest T-Rexes ever discovered, and most complete. I got a chance to dig on a small T-Rex up in Montana with Jack Horner's crew. I just didn't tell him who I was. And this is Dave Riccio. We got to be pretty good friends. There's a T-Rex tooth, which is a small one. Some of them are this big. Biggest teeth of all the theropod dinosaurs are the ones that became meat eaters, many of them after the fall. Some theropods didn't have teeth, so they probably weren't meat eaters necessarily. But T-Rex was, because we find their bite marks in animals where their teeth actually broke off. They're very distinctive. You can see where it healed over, just like a tree with something in it heals around it. So some of these dinosaurs were still alive when they were being bit, but they didn't get killed, and so they survived and they were buried in the flood. But again, like the Ceratopsians, T-Rexes are all found up here in the upper Cretaceous layers, in the Hell Creek Formation, the Lance Formation in Wyoming. And all around the world, there's similar animals that look like a T-Rex. They just call them something else. But we look below, there's nothing. There's no T-Rexes down here. There's nothing that looks like a T-Rex down here at all. They keep publishing papers, oh, I found the ancestor to T-Rex, but they never really do. David Weisample said this a few years back, who's the author of Dinosauria. So he looked at more dinosaurs probably than anybody. Like Sir Richard Owen, he was the world-renowned anatomist at the time in the 1840s. David Weisample has probably seen more dinosaurs than anybody. He said this: alas, my list of dinosaurian ancestors is an empty one. They have nothing they can point to and say, this is the ancestor of this. They just show up fully formed, just the way God designed them, the way God engineered them, as you learned in the last talk. All fossils appear in rocks without fossils, even the trilobites. They've looked for trilobite ancestors in the rocks below, and they find nothing. I've written articles on this on our website. They look and look and look, and they can't find anything to show where these things came from. They just show up fully formed, and then they stay the same for a while, and then they disappear, because that environment now is wiped out. Once the dinosaurs disappeared worldwide, their environment was gone. Then God was flooding the next level. And you see these mammals on top of the dinosaurs, like in the Badlands. And so it's all ecological zonation. There's no known ancestors to any dinosaur groups, and they would admit this. Let's move on to number 3. Dinosaurs evolved into birds. Again, this is a big one, because this is what we hear all the time. Some of you might not have heard this, that dinosaurs are birds and birds are dinosaurs. And dinosaurs didn't go extinct, they became birds. I've heard that as well. I don't make this stuff up. This is what they're saying. This is the DVDs I used to show my students. And I have to stop them and say, okay, what's he basing it on? They're just saying stuff. Bob Bacher would go on, blah, 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 dinosaurs do this, dinosaurs do that. They could see in color, blah, blah. I'm like, wait a minute. How does he know they can see in color? He's making it up. But he sounds authoritative. Authority doesn't make it right. Just because you got the consensus doesn't make it right. Consensus is not science. Consensus is not science. You can write that down. You should be able to question everything, even what we do. But if you base it on the data, it's harder to argue. Dinosaurs did not evolve into birds, as we're going to see. Did they look like this? And you're going to see this in Jurassic World, the new movie coming out this June 10th. I'm not recommending going to see it for that reason, but it is kind of fun to watch dinosaurs. So we're going to go and do a podcast, Dr. Thomas and I are, afterwards, and talk about some of the myths that they're spreading. And one of them, I believe, is this. Now, there's other creation paleontologists that are going around the country talking. And you might have heard them, and they're friends of mine. They're saying dinosaurs had feathers. What they're calling dinosaurs with feathers, I believe, and so does a bird paleontologist who's the evolutionist, Alan Fiducia, he conclusively shows in his books and his research that these were birds that had feathers. To his knowledge, no dinosaur had ever had feathers, and I think he's correct. Only birds had feathers, as we'll see. This isn't what we're going to. This is a bird. This is Archaeopteryx. They're even trying to make this a dinosaur now, again. This was supposed to be a transitional fossil, but really it's just a bird that flew somewhat like a pheasant. They've actually done studies. It has a bony tail, has a couple little teeth, and it has claws on its wings, but it probably flew like a pheasant. So this was buried in the middle of the dinosaur layers in the Jurassic. In Germany, they found about 11 or 12 of these now. Real feathers. They look like feathers. So remember what those feathers look like. And this is what they're telling you are feathered dinosaurs. Sinosauropteryx. Can you say Sinosauropteryx fast? Just slur it really fast like I do. Sinosauropteryx. There you go. Perfect. Well, these are supposed to be proto-feathers, or the precursors to real feathers, because they don't look quite like real feathers. But you can see there's some colors. They might have had a striped tail. See these little bands? But all that is hair-like stuff. What is that hair-like stuff? The bones of these species, Stephen Brusette says, and this is an article where he talks about feathered dinosaurs in the headline, and you get right down to it and you read it in Scientific American. He says, okay, the bones of these species are covered with a thick, feathery fluff, not the quill pen feathers of living birds, but simpler, filament-like feathers that look like hair. But yet his headline was a new feathered dinosaur. But he admits they're not really feathers, because feathers look like feathers. These are not feathers, it's like hair. And Alan Fiducia, again, who was ignored pretty much by the scientific community, but he's an evolutionist. He's a bird paleontologist. He said in 2005 he did some research where he squished a dolphin, piece of a dolphin. Dolphin has a few hairs because it's a mammal. And he squished it down, and what you'll see is it looks just like this. That's the collagen fibers in the skin that's bleeding off as you squish these things down. It's not feathers at all. There are no proto-feathers. This is just collagen. So here's his pictures from his article he published in 2005, yet it's ignored because consensus science ramrods right over it. They ignore the real facts, real empirical data, where he simulated, made this dolphin look really hairy, like it had feathers coming off it. But they don't look like real feathers. They look like those proto-feathers, they call them. And again, this scares me too. Most evidence comes from one location in China, and that should scare you all, because they don't always tell you the truth, as we'll find. There's been several hoaxes. This is a bird called, again, a lot of people call it a dinosaur. This is a bird called Microraptor. It had feathers on its back legs, had a bony tail. It actually is almost the same as Archaeopteryx, but it's found in China, not in Germany, in a different rock layer, so they have to call it something else. But this Archaeopteryx had feathers on its legs too. You go back and look at the diagrams, you can see there's some feathers back here. Very, very similar, extinct bony-tailed birds. And it had a beak. So you need a beak to have feathers, because you got to fix your feathers. Dinosaurs, T-Rex tried to fix its feathers with its jaw. It's like not going to work, so the feathers are going to be useless. So why put feathers on an animal that doesn't have the beak to keep them, groomed? Frank Sherman told me that before I came to give this talk. He said, remind him about that, Tim. Dr. Frank Sherman on our staff. But that's true. You got to have the right beak. And these things don't walk right. If you pull the legs down, Dave Menton at AIG said, you pull the legs down here, the thing falls over. Birds and dinosaurs walk different. They forget to look at the back hip structure. They're all worried about the front legs and the wings, and the back legs tell the tail. Because birds walk on their knees with their thighs inside their body. Dinosaurs walk like us. Thighs are down. Completely different walking style, but you have to balance on the hips. T-Rex balanced on its back hips. This balanced on its knees, kind of underneath its body, but the legs came out funny. This was a bird. Even though there's a lot of people saying this is a dinosaur, it's a bird with feathers. Frauds abound as well from China. This is 1999, if you remember this. Some of you weren't born then. But in 1999, this big article in National Geographic, an hour-long TV show I suffered through, talking about this new transitional fossil between birds and dinosaurs, half bird, half dinosaur. It's the missing link, and they all jumped on it. They bought the specimen at the Tucson Rock and Mineral Show for like $70,000. And I wrote in, I said, you know, I'm a college professor. I said, why are you teaching people bad science? You never name a new species on something you bought that wasn't in place. And they ignored my letter. I never got a letter back. 6 months later, I found out this. It was half bird, half dinosaur because it was a bird glued to a dinosaur. So it was a new bird species glued to a new dinosaur species. They glued it together, sold it, made some more money off it, and fooled all the top paleontologists of the world, including Phil Curry up in Canada, Bob Bacher here in the U.S. They all like, oh, no, it wasn't me. But they all backed off pretty quick when they found it was a hoax. But they believed it because they wanted to believe it. You can believe a lot of things if you want to believe it. A lot of myths get believed even though they're not true. And in 2017, and there's still people that still show pictures of T-Rex with feathers. Reluctantly, Phil Bell and his colleagues in 2017 shows without question T-Rex had scaly skin. And he said, but all the other theropods had feathers. But we know that T-Rex, the Tyrannosaurs, didn't because they found too much of this. Here's T-Rex skin. They saw it over and over and over. We have hundreds of skin imprints of dinosaurs, and they all show scaly skin. They're trying to put feathers on them because they want them to evolve into birds. They're even making them warm-blooded because they want them to evolve into birds. I don't believe dinosaurs were necessarily warm-blooded. I think they were strong evidence they're cold-blooded. I talk about that in my book. It's suppressed. You don't hear that information. I had to find it. I had to dig when I was looking at a lab for my students to try to find the pros and cons of warm-blooded versus cold-blooded. And I think the evidence is pretty compelling. It was cold-blooded. But if you're a paleontologist who doesn't believe in God and you believe in evolution, or maybe you believe in God and you still believe in evolution, then you have to make dinosaurs turn into birds. But there's other problems as well. You got to make them warm-blooded. That's why they steam up the window in Jurassic Park. I don't believe they would steam up the window. And they weren't that smart either because they had little bitty brains. Even T-Rexes, I plotted the brain size from the brain cavity of a T-Rex in my book. Make my students, it plots pretty close to the reptile line. It had a bigger brain because it was a bigger body. But it plots on the reptile line. It doesn't plot on the bird line. The shape of the brains aren't even like birds. They're like crocodiles. The shape of a dinosaur brain, they can tell by the bones, again, where the cavity was. They can give you a pretty good idea what the shape of the brain looked like. They were not bird brains at all. Dinosaurs had crocodile brains. Cold-blooded, the brain shape didn't have the processing that a warm-blooded animal needs to be a bird. And we look for where we find the most bird-like dinosaurs. This is just a lie. These animals over here are found below these animals in the rock record. We found Archaeopteryx, a full bird down here in the Jurassic rocks. The most bird-like, supposedly, dinosaurs are found up here. So you have a bird, and things that are here that are bird-like turn into birds. How do you get a bird? It's like having the grandparent before the grandchild. How do you do that? If you're an evolutionist, here's what you do. You make up a ghost lineage of an unknown ancestor to both, because you know you're right. You're doing verification science, they call it. Alan Fiducia gets mad at these people because they do verification science. They go out there and prove what they already think they know. So they know that dinosaurs evolved into birds, so therefore there's got to be an unknown ancestor down here. So they draw a dashed line from the raptors down to an unknown ancestor, and they draw a dashed line from the Archaeopteryx down to an unknown ancestor. Oh, problem solved. And they walk off the stage and drop the mic. Dashed lines mean you're making it up. Unknown means you're never going to find it, and never have. But this is what they teach as science. I've watched video after video of this. Used to show my students. They stand up here with a straight face, and I'm kind of kidding about it, but it's true. That's exactly what they'll tell you. And so it's not a problem to find dinosaurs up here. Gunter Weil admits to the problem. He's an honest paleontologist. Dinosaurs in China are not the ancestors of birds, of course. They can't be because they are later than Archaeopteryx. They're found in rocks above Archaeopteryx. There must have been older dinosaurs with feathers, yet we haven't found, he says, yet we haven't found any evidence for them, unfortunately. Why does it say unfortunately? Because they want so badly for it to be true. Because they don't want to believe there was a God who created each individual kind. And no kind can cross. Dinosaurs were created on day 6. When were birds created? Day 5. If you're an old Earth person, you believe that days were long periods of time. You have birds created, and then millions of years later you have dinosaurs. But yet the current evolutionary thought is dinosaurs evolved into birds. So that doesn't make any sense. So God did that, I think, for a reason, to show the folly of modern science. And when did he make the sun, moon, the stars? Day 4. And when were plants created? So how can plants live for millions of years without a sun? See, God provided the light for those first few days until he made the sun. But he didn't, it wasn't millions of years, it was a day. Each was a day, just like he says in the Bible. So you don't have to worry about this. Myth busting 3, dinosaurs did not evolve into birds. Birds were buried in rocks before dinosaurs, and actually many of these birds are found with dinosaurs too. And so it isn't just one example. Some birds are just hoaxes, like the Archaeoraptor was a total hoax, and there's other hoaxes as well. Finally, let's move on to how old are the dinosaurs? Are they really 66 million years old? A lot of your books might say 65, but that's the current number is 66 because they changed it. So the Chicxulub impact was supposed to hit 65 million years ago, and then they changed that to 66. So we're only off a million years. I studied the impact when I was doing my column studies, and there's almost no iridium in those wells. So you have a smoking gun with no smoke. There's 2 that found some iridium. And there's not enough melt. There should be thousands of meters of melt. There's only like a couple hundred meters. So if there was an impact at that time, it was a very small bump. It didn't cause the extinction of any dinosaurs. It just happened towards the peak of the flood. So there were some impacts, but they really weren't that important. So I argue with 7-year-old kids. I'm like, all right, I give up. Because you can't, that's what he was told. He argued until he's blue in the face. That they went extinct because of an asteroid. That's what your kids are learning. My wife taught kindergarten. She had to cross out the millions of years. And all these books at the Christian school she taught at. That's why we wrote those Henry books. To give you guys a story, not just facts, but a story you can read to your kids. They have some facts in there. But there's very few books out there that actually teach dinosaurs from a young Earth perspective. And yet they're always thrown in the millions of years. They really aren't this old, as they say. Dinosaur, again, we talked about this earlier, and Dr. Thomas will as well and did. Here's Mary Schweitzer's original work in 2005 on the T-Rex femur. Found this particular stuff. It's like just like a rubber band could stretch and come back because it's still original collagens, original proteins. Here's a picture from a 2017 article in Nature Communications showing a confirmed blood vessel. This is where they first confirmed there are blood vessels. True blood vessels, still flexible like we have. 195 million year old. That's what they say. There's osteocytes, bone-making cells, with the little philia coming off, still there, still touching each other. And these little black dots, they won't admit, they just say they're red blood cell-like features. But those are the red blood cells. They've even found hemoglobin in some of these specimens, as we'll see. How can these things still be there if they're really that old? There's no, you're going against empirical science here. You're arguing against the decay of organic compounds. And here they found a Mosasaur. It's supposed to be 110 million years old. Heart, liver, retina, scales, etc., all preserved. This red stuff in here had hemoglobin. It's still red, just like our blood is red, because it still has the original proteins that make it red. How can this stuff be 100 and some million years old? Still have original parts. So we're still waiting for a definitive answer from the evolutionary community on this. They put forth a few kind of wild, crazy ideas, and we explained it away. Like, you didn't explain it away. You gave an excuse that you guys now use. You gave yourself a crutch, but you didn't explain it away. So we're still waiting for them to explain it away. They refuse to believe. And even Jack Horner, who I dug with in one of his more recent books, which wasn't that good, but he said the creationists are going to love this stuff. He knew right away the creationists are going to love this stuff because he knows this shows a young Earth and a recent flood. And we see human interaction with dinosaurs after the flood. So dinosaurs got off the ark and they survived until maybe just a few hundred years ago. We see lots of evidence. We see this in the Bible. Behemoth. Behold now Behemoth, which I made you with, who eats grass like an ox. His strength is in his loins, force in the bellies of his tail like a cedar. Like Dr. Thomas says, Lebanon cedar. Crocodiles don't really have a tail like a cedar even. That would balance back and forth as it walked. So we don't see tail dragging marks in the footprints. We don't see belly dragging marks in the footprints. We just see the dinosaurs held their bodies upright. They're balanced perfectly on their hips. They're four-legged, they balance on those four hips. They're two-legged, they balance on their hind hips. But we don't see anything dragging. So they have to balance everything out. God designed these things perfectly. His bones are like bars of iron. The leg bones are solid. The backbone pieces are hollowed out because God made the tail and the neck light. Small heads on these things instead of a big head, because if you had a big head, you'd fall over. God knew exactly what he was doing. He made these big sauropod dinosaurs, the behemoth type of thing. And people used to scoff and say, well, what about grass? There was no grass in the dinosaur rocks. Grass didn't evolve until after the dinosaurs were already extinct. 2005, in India, I didn't put it on here. 2005 in India, they found dinosaur dung with sauropod bones, long neck bones. They showed 5 species of grass. And before that, they had no fossil grass because grass doesn't fossilize very well. But when it's compressed and goes through the system of a dinosaur and comes out the back end like horse manure. See, I thought horses, I thought every Texan rode a horse to work. And they only drive their SUVs up here. But I found that's not true. Very few of them have horses. There are a few that do. But there's some good rodeos down there, though, I got to admit. The Mesquite Rodeo rocks. Joel, he's nodding. Fort Worth one's a little commercial. Anyway, what do you think these are showing? Standing up erect. We didn't know dinosaurs walked erect until when? 1841. These are walking erect, kids. Long necks, long tails. Looks almost like a dinosaur, and these are thousands of years old. Here's 2 sauropods from Carlisle Cathedral. They used to walk on it over and over and over. Look at the legs. They're walking erect. 2 long-necked dinosaurs, looks like. What else would you say these were? Mythological creatures? That's what they're always called, but they're walking erect. How did we know this? And we didn't know for 400 years that they walked erect. And then there's this, we have a rendition of this at our Discovery Center down in Dallas. If you get down that way, try not to come in July or in August, but come down that way when it's cooler, and you'll see there's a lion, there's a water buffalo, there's a, it's kind of like the Chinese calendar year. All these other animals are still alive except for the dragon. All these other animals are still alive except for this, which looks a lot like a Stegosaurus. How it turns its back and makes it fan-shaped. Now the head may be a little bit too big, but look at the legs. They're coming straight down the body. How would they know to do that until 1841? Myth-busting number 4. Soft tissues and all these proteins creates big problems for the evolutionary scientists. It's not a problem at all for those of us that believe the Earth is young. The flood happened 4,500 years ago. It was a real event. Fossils don't take long to form. They just take the right conditions. So we don't find dinosaurs after the flood. Nobody's making fossils today. The animals die, they get eaten, they decay away. You got to have the right conditions to make fossils. Thousands and thousands, billions and billions of them. And here I am in Thermopolis with Frank. It's a different Frank. I forget his last name. But he stole my Stegosaur plate. After they didn't hire him for the rest of the year, he stole a bunch of things, got arrested. I don't know whatever happened. But I have pictures of it. I found a Stegosaur plate up there in Thermopolis. But I was getting pretty plastered there. That's how Baptists get plastered. For you, a Lutheran audience here, this is what Baptists, that's how we do it. All right, moving right along. Let's summarize on that note. 4 evolutionary myths, which I think I busted, at least to some extent, is number 1, dinosaurs are not buried slow, they're buried rapidly in the flood conditions. That's what provides the perfect conditions for millions and millions and millions of dinosaur fossils. Secondly, dinosaurs do not have ancestral forms. When push comes to shove, even the evolutionary scientists will admit, we got nothing. There's nothing they can point to that says this is the ancestor to this and this. Our descendants are the same way. And dinosaurs did not evolve into birds. They're completely separate kinds. Completely separate. I don't believe dinosaurs are even warm-blooded, although there is still a little bit of debate on that, because we don't know for certain without a living dinosaur. But it's hard from the rocks as a geologist to say, here's birds, here's dinosaurs, you're saying evolved into birds. There's an order to those rocks for a reason, just like the bricks over here. You can't pull bricks up from the bottom and expect that wall to survive. You can't have the grandchild before the grandson. No, that'll work, grandchild before the grandfather, or the grandmother. That's how it works. I got to get more sleep. Dinosaur fossils are only 4,500 years old. That's kind of the rounded figure we use for the flood. They're not 500 years old. That's kind of the rounded figure we use for the flood. There's no evidence that they're billions or millions of years old in this case. It's supposed to be the Triassic, Jurassic. Define those layers because those layers are defined based on the fossils they contain. So it's not a coincidence that the Cretaceous is where all the dinosaurs disappeared. That's how they define the Cretaceous all over the world. So there's a little bit of circular reasoning in some of that. But that's the different levels of the flood levels as you were going higher and higher and higher. More seafloor being created kept flooding different environments. So you'd encompass the plants the dinosaurs were found with. You encompass the plants the mammals are found with. That's why we see things showing up suddenly, fully formed, even starting at the Cambrian explosion at the bottom, in the very first sequence in the Sauk. Trilobites suddenly show up with eyes, fully formed, ready to go, because they were going for 1,600 years before the flood came on and destroyed them. The book you talked about is here. It's for sale. I think there's about 20 of them left. The carved and stone books are sold out, but I believe our events guys can give you a card to give you a discount. If you order online, you can get a discount, make up for it. Same thing is true of this if it runs out. It's only a one-time order, though, so if you don't get either of them, you can get them both online. We'll ship them to you as well. But this turned out to be a pretty good book. I was reading through it the other day. I'm like, that's pretty good. And I'm like, God must have been helping me because I don't know how I wrote some of this stuff. I'm like, God does help. He doesn't inspire me necessarily, but he does help bring the topics up. And so I'm like, the end of this book really shows how I was looking at North America. I didn't even have the other continents done. I was already starting to see the pattern of like that dinosaur peninsula. Even if this was the very first book I wrote since I came to ICR, but it turned out pretty good. And I don't like to brag about myself, but this one was better than the pictures are awesome. Henry Morris III said it's worth it for the pictures alone. So even 3-year-olds like the pictures. And there's lots of pictures of my daughter in there at different stages when we were digging dinosaurs. I'm pretty happy about that. And then my wife and I, again, we wrote this, and we have a second book, of course, it's out there now. The second, where he gets off the ark, and then there's going to be a third book in about 2 years, I hope, if I'm nice enough to Dr. G. Hopefully, he's not listening. No, there'll be a third one where he's Grandpa Henry. And it's at the Tower of Babel 200 years later. So, because dinosaurs lived hundreds of years. The biggest ones are probably 700-800 years old. How old were humans pre-flood? 700-800 years old. So those big dinosaurs, they just kept growing and growing and growing. The other evidence that they're cold-blooded. You know, cold-blooded animals, a lot of them keep growing throughout their lifetime. They just grow slower. They get fast. Because if you were big, you were safe. Elephants don't get attacked by lions too often when they're fully grown, but the baby ones do. So if you're a baby dinosaur, you want to grow fast. So God designed them to grow pretty quick. And then they slowed down and grew and grew and grew and grew and grew. But those aren't the ones I don't think God brought on the ark. He brought juveniles on the ark before their growth spurt. Because even us as humans, we go through a growth spurt. As teenagers, we eat 5 pizzas at a sitting. And dinosaurs, and once they got off the ark, they eat everything in sight. And so they had to wait on the ark, even though the earth was dry day 314, until day 371, because they had to wait for stuff to grow. There's no food to get off. It was just barren. So once the grass and the greenery started growing, then God said, open the doors. And God knew what he was doing. If you don't learn anything from any of my talks, is that God had a plan. He has a plan for you. And he's opened salvation for you. So I think, and there's the DVD that shows some of those videos we showed earlier. That's for sale. And then this book, we have some of these still. Joel? Nope, they're out. Got to order those. Get your 20% off card. Order all 3 books. If you didn't get any of them, order more. It's a one-time shot, so order everything you can. Get ready for Christmas, even though it's April. It's Earth Day. Yesterday was something like that. All right, and if nothing else, sign up for your free Acts and Facts. I hound my students all the time, and they still, at the end of the semester, we're finishing up our term, where I teach a class locally in Texas, 1 class a year, and still half of them haven't signed up. because they don't listen. And it's free. Enough people give to ICR, we can give this to you for free every other month. We went to every other month so we can get more research done. And it really is helping. So I appreciate your prayers, your money, everything you give to ICR. Again, if it's just prayers, that's what we need more than anything. But we do need some funding once in a while so I can keep the research going, so Dr. G can get the research going with his CET research he's working on, the blind cavefish, all that stuff. Dr. Thomas needs it to run his samples, to look at different instruments, to find his, proteins in these dinosaur bones and do more research. Everything costs a little bit of money, and our salaries and everything else. It all adds up. But God has been blessing ICR for many, many years, and many of you in here are part of that blessing, that you really enable us to do the research we're doing, and it's a really encouragement to hear the feedback from you guys, even if we disagree on some stuff. But it's wonderful to get face-to-face feedback. It's, even though I'm not getting research done, this is more important, to show the results of that research to you, that it really was a global flood, and the dinosaurs really were not birds, and probably didn't have feathers, none that I can see. So thank you very much. I'm turning it over to our host of the most. Thank you.